this of the earlier period. And which personages they could not assimilate into their view of the world, I simply left out. Idea being, see no evil, hear no evil. The idea was to have students identify with these rather positive images, or at least what they assume to be positive images, and forget the rest. Well, of course, this wasn't entirely a progressive idea. It was, even before that, and is still today, a fundamentalist idea of how you teach kids. And since, of course, religious fundamentalism antedates the progressives by quite a long time, one might conclude that it was indeed a fundamentalist theory, which was being used in the reverse, by the left. Well, today, of course, you can see it very much in operation. The Mel Gablers was this couple in Texas, and many other people all around the country trying to purge school libraries of books they don't like, are trying to change the textbooks to take out things that they don't believe in. I mean, they would like to take out the United Nations from the textbooks. They would like to have, in the past, these Gablers tried to take out any mention of Social Security because they think it shouldn't be. At the same time, they want to put back Patrick Henry and the remark he probably didn't make and that kind of thing, and show us only the sort of four-person conventional family, and that's it. Well, you may think that they believe this is the way the United States is, but that can't be true because at the same time, fundamentalists are denouncing American society as being nothing but full of crime, full of homosexuality, full of lack of leadership, weak, about to fall to the Russians. They picture American society as Babylon on one side. And the other side, they're asking their textbooks, their myths, their dreams, to show it as Israel. And this contrast exists. Well, apparently, this isn't a question of holding two conflicting ideas at once. As I say, they seem to know the difference between the real world and the one they wish to see in textbooks. And as they see it, there's an efficient purpose in putting only the ideal world into the books, and that is the reform of society along these lines. It's a rather primitive form of behaviorism, if you want. I mean, monkey see, monkey do, and you are what you eat. And so it's this attitude which interests me. Fundamentalists, the Gablers, and those many other people who are meddling with textbooks are very explicit about the purpose of this. And their views their sort of behaviorist notions are so extreme that many people at liberal universities may look upon them as a somewhat exotic group. But I don't think it's true. I think that there are many people in this country, but more or less, who believe the same thing. Liberals, progressives as well as progressives, who did the same thing on the other side in the early part of this century. And there are the pressure groups who've been from all sides, including the NAACP and the B'nai B'rith and so on, have in some sense been operating in the same mode. Just put in the things you want and take out everything else. Well, the question is, do they, and when one might ask the question about the fundamentalists, because they are so explicit about this point, do they really believe that they can manipulate children to that degree? Knowing, of course, full well that schools are a very limited source of information to children. I mean, perhaps one of the least important sources, given the omnipresence of television. Can they really believe that changing the textbooks will change the world, will reform society? I think it's hard to believe that in a way. That this conscious attempt at deception, because that's what it is also perhaps has an element of self-deception in it. In either case, what is the motive? What is the motive, not just for fundamentalists, but of all those groups that have gone into creating textbooks, and it's vast numbers of people in this country. What is the motive for presenting American society as rootless vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis Africa, as isolated on this continent? What is the motive in telling children that we're a nation of perfectly nice people all the time, ruled by idealism alone? What's the point of denying that we've had conflicts in this society and saying that there are no predicaments but only problems, you know? Well, I think that the answer may well have something to do with the very existence of that retirement community I talked about initially. That very privileged and very isolated kind of golfing camp for senior citizens. It has a curiously adolescent atmosphere about it, this community. And the question of whether people went there voluntarily or they went there because they felt that that the outside society was hostile to them is moot here, because whatever it is, it seems that there is not a huge respect for age in this society, and that the desire to return to this kind of adolescent camp has the same value on it. I mean, that is, as individuals and perhaps as a nation, we are people that don't want to grow up. The trouble is, so that all of these images that I've been talking about, those of this rootlessness, those of getting off on a boat, going off, exploring this new world, are essentially images of childhood. And we've always thought of ourselves as a young nation. Well, since World War II, the United States as a country and Americans as a people have had to start to confront certain kinds of limits that they never had before. I mean, no longer do we as a nation live in this kind of limitless room that a child might see out ahead of them, where it's simply boundless. We see now that there are limits to our military power, to our economic power, limits to the continent itself and our ability to use it and exploit it without fouling our own nests. There are limits on our ability to absorb vast numbers of new immigrants. There are limits just about everywhere we turn. And of course, in thinking of ourselves as a young nation, we've always wanted to think of ourselves as being a nation without such limits. And now we have to grow up. That is, we've already grown up in a way, but it's necessary to come to terms with it. And it's not a comfortable process. It's just no fun to grow up at all, I tell you. Or to recognize the limitations on self. Far, far better to believe in supply-side economics. Far, far better to believe that the United States can derive total security from a buildup of nuclear arms. Far, far better to continue believing in sort of infinite capacity for economic growth. But of course, the limits are there, and we see them. We even deal with them quite successfully from time to time, off and on. The problem is really to acknowledge them on some deeper level, perhaps on some more superficial level, you might say, because I've been talking mainly about textbooks and about political rhetoric. But those textbooks and that rhetoric, I think, are reflections of our real sense of self, of these images and metaphors that we use to describe ourselves and the ways in which we really see ourselves. They're not the only ones that exist. I think that there are plenty of competing ones. But it's interesting that there is really no strong voice in, let us say, the Democratic Party at the moment, or anywhere else, that has managed to create an image and metaphor which will show us these limits without terrifying us at the same time. You know, that is able to create a notion of a very complicated society and a complicated world, one with enormous interrelationship of parts. This was the great failure, I think, of the Carter administration and those before him. I mean, whether or not you know, things happen, things go on, but it is this dream, it is this mythology that I think will have to be revised. Thank you.
Ms. Fitzgerald is willing to answer any questions.
Well, what some of them say is this: the Vietnam War started. It was an agonizing war. The U.S. government officials kept trying to make peace all the time, and they failed because of North Vietnamese ambitions. And then the war went on and went on, and finally it stopped. I mean, literally, it's that bad. Because, and the reason why it's that bad is that the textbook publishers know perfectly well that the society has not resolved that issue for itself. That there's, you know, deep cleavage down the center, and so they just don't want to commit these big basal textbooks to taking any position. There are some exceptions. I mean, the ones that are, particularly ones that are of smaller sales, let's say, you know, that are for specific kinds of communities. And the ones that are the more literate ones have somewhat denser explanations. But the basal ones just refuse to say anything, essentially. Yeah? Yeah.
Was the Vietnam War, in essence, a war against communism?
In the textbooks? Yes.
But they don't mention it.
Well, that's what they say, but it's a little confusing because this notion of monolithic communism can no longer exist, and therefore they again leap over a lot of issues, such as the implications of the Sino-Soviet split for American strategic interests in the Pacific. You know, you don't ever get there, I'm afraid. That's the trouble. And some of them actually record Nixon's visit to China in '71 without ever telling us about the Sino-Soviet split. It's very interesting. Suddenly we were becoming these great friends with China, while monolithic communism still exists. It's very puzzling.
The way that you look at the writing of textbooks seems to imply that there is somehow a conspiracy, a monolithic. They, the publishers, wrote these books in the 50s. They, the publishers, wrote these books in the 70s. And that is not true.
I didn't mean to imply that at all.
Categorize textbooks in the 50s. I mean, whether you meant to say that, that's the way it comes across. The sense that somehow there's this group of conspirators trying to write history in the 50s to do these things to us. We want to brainwash us. And then you've got another group in the 70s. And of course,
I thought I had explained, by the way, that.
There are lots of competitors, and I know, having written an 8th grade textbook, I know that I did not consult with that person down there on the way they wrote that textbook.
Excuse me, but the only reason that I was interested in textbooks at all was because I felt that they were reflections of the whole society. I am essentially not, this is not an expose of publishers, and you know, it is only to the extent that I have to prove in this book that in fact the publishers do rewrite the text for the marketplace. They do it from market research, they do it because of state and local guidelines, they do it because of what sells. They want to get a book that sells. So therefore, there is no conspiracy. That's precisely the point. If it were one, it wouldn't be worth talking about them. And it's possible that you may have misunderstood, but I thought I had said that when I said they, what I meant was an enormous numbers of people who go into choosing what textbooks to buy for the schools. Enormous numbers.
That's why I was a bit surprised at your ending. Are you really suggesting that it's a function of a politician or administration to create metaphors? Is that,
Yes, absolutely.
around, they were creating images all over the place. Can viable images, can real ones, or is that more of the same kind of shell game that you've been talking about?
Well, if something is really right, that's what's called leadership, I think. And it seems to me that the shell games are all over and always with us, and there are a lot of lousy politicians around who give it a try, but it fails. It's the real politicians. The people who are serious figures. One thinks of Churchill and particularly of Roosevelt recently, who were able to present an entirely new vision of the way the world was. And I think that is the function